My name is Thomas Jung. I'm working at the Alfred Wegener Institute for Polar and Marine Research in Bremerhaven. I'm a climate modeler, so we are developing models in my group and also then using them to understand the climate system and look into the future. And I happen to be the coordinator of EERIE. I think EERIE is really about transforming the way we simulate the weather in the atmosphere and in the ocean in climate models. So, improving the realism of how the models can do that, the efficiency with which we can do that, but then use the simulations that are carried out with the models to generate scientific insight as well, and look into the future, sort of how weather in the atmosphere and in the ocean are changing. I think it's certainly meeting the goals. We set out to simulate the Eddy-rich climate system. I think we accomplished that with our what we call phase 1 simulations, so our first set of simulations. I think that is very good. We were actually sort of exceeding or not exceeding expectations. I think the quality actually of our phase 1 simulation exceeded our original expectations. I mean, not everything is perfect. We know, for example, that especially in polar regions, there are certain model issues that need to be overcome. But overall, it can be said that the quality of the models and the simulations is better than anticipated. But also in terms of scientific insight, I guess we understand now that these models are capable of certainly having a very realistic representation of the weather in the ocean. So I think that's very good. That was one of the, are they able to do that or not? That was one of the goals. And we also see first results of how sort of the weather of the ocean eddies are changing in a warming world. And it seems to be consistent with some of the prior thinking and hypotheses that were around. So I think, yes, we certainly ticked a lot of the boxes of things we wanted to accomplish. And I think it's fair to say that in certain parts we even went beyond. I would like to point out two interesting aspects. One is what is called the so-called data viewer that has been developed as part of the project. And I think it's a very nice, intuitive and efficient way of exploring some of the basic characteristics, of the simulation. So it's a little bit similar, and so probably based also on the concept of a similar viewer that has been developed in the context of IPCC, but this time, adapted to Eddy-rich aspects. And I think that's really cool, sort of looking at climate change, but also at drift and in the future also biases of models. I think it can be done in a very simple and a very intuitive way. I think that's really nice. So going from complex simulations to information and knowledge, I think the data viewer is really great in that regard. And then there's this second aspect on data that I want to highlight here, and that's the so-called EERIE cloud, or now more called the kilometer scale cloud. And that's just a completely different way of working with the data, of storing the data, sort of using new approaches like chunking, and just to use a few expert terms, right? But what it basically means is people don't need to download the data anymore. They just pick out of the archive what they really want to look at. And on the fly, they can even modify that, compress the data. And basically what that means is you're looking at sort of extracting information out of the data is much faster and much more efficient. And you can almost say, what before took weeks, with these kind of approaches takes minutes or hours. So that is a kind of acceleration we are seeing. And it's really interesting to see that these ideas are also picked up by other communities in the modeling part. It's not just the kilometer scale, high resolution community, but from what I can see, there's also an increasing amount of interest from other communities as well. And it seems to be really the future of working and dealing with data. Finishing the simulation is one aspect, but then also publishing them and making the data available is certainly one of the other thing. And then I'm very confident that the phase 1-2 simulations, will be delivered on time. That's not a problem at all. And some of this phase 2 simulations have been finished already. But EERIE coming to an end, and people needing to write the publications, we just need to make sure that this is all sufficiently fast so that this can be included in the science that's currently being done. So certainly finishing and enabling the uptake of those data is a challenge, but I'm quite optimistic that this can be overcome. There's also a lot of community building around the simulations and the data, right? Because I mean, this can be used not just by the people working directly for ERIE, but the data are shared, and the wider scientific community can use that. And again, that's something we have seen in sort of working in these hackathons, but that's something, of course, that can happen all the time. This being able for the first time to realistically represent in models, whether in the atmosphere and in the ocean, that this is a key aspect that needs to be brought across for policymakers, but also for stakeholders, because there is information content at the local scale where decisions are being taken. So I think that's something that needs to be a message that needs to be put across to policymakers, but also more generally to a wider range of stakeholders. That's key. In the past it has been CMIP runs, Codec run, and these were the data sets people based decisions on. But I think this landscape will become richer, and people will start to use kilometer scale Eddy-rich models because they add something important to the whole mix. But also people will increasingly use the fact that we see more of the climate change in observations during the observational record. And so that's certainly one of the aspects. Some of the ideas of running simulations, for example, I could imagine that Destination Earth will be taking on some of that. So really running these so-called high-res MIP2 simulation, a certain protocol that has been defined by ERIE in sort of together with a wider community. So having this kind of experiments run using the new CMIP7 protocol enforcing, so really using a setup that is really meant to inform the next IPCC report, I think that will be key, and I could imagine that Destination Earth is playing a role there. There will be some follow-on projects. It's certainly not ERIE 2, right? But there are some projects emerging, and I think they will pick up some of the legacy with this one as well. But I think we do have a community that's there. There will be hackathons and people will be descending on similar places and come along. So there won't be ERIE 2, but there will be other initiatives that I think will be carrying on the spirit of what we have been sort of laying out or contributed to laying out together with others like NextGen's Destination Earth and so forth.